Hey everybody, welcome to Dreamseed VR. I'm Seraphin, and today we're going to do BCI-3, Brain-Computer Interface, Part 3. So I honestly have no idea how long this series is going to go. It's going to go as long as there's weird shit to tell you, to be quite honest. And I have done a little research in the past few weeks about some interesting stuff that comes from DARPA in particular, and I felt like it would be interesting to cover it considering we've already talked a little bit about some of their Boston Dynamics robot stuff. So to begin, I want to tell you about a graphic novel that I read a number of years ago by Grant Morrison and Frank Quietly called We 3. We 3 is kind of like cybernetic Homeward Bound. It's the story of 3 animals that are a part of a government experiment to create bioorgs. And a bioorg is a cyborg, but an animal, essentially. Some other kind of biological entity that's been cybernetically modified. In this case, it's a dog, like a Labrador dog, a house cat, and a rabbit. And these 3 animals escape the lab, and it's the story of them finding their freedom and figuring out aspects of like who they are and understanding the nature of what it is that's made their lives different. It's a tearjerker. If you're not prepared for it, you got to get a box of tissues. You just do. We 3 is philosophical, and it really makes you reevaluate the nature of sentience. Now, the reason why I wanted to bring up We 3 is not only because it relates to some of the DARPA stuff I'm going to talk about, but also because I've been really enjoying this adorable YouTube channel over the past couple weeks, I would say. It's called BilliSpeaks, and I'll be sure to include a little link to it. Billy is this adorable house cat, and her owner has figured out a way to create a lexicon of buttons. And numerous other people have done this, but I feel like Billy's case is quite successful, and she has a pretty big vocabulary for a house cat training with this method. And so there is a spot situated in their house where there's a bunch of buttons laid out that all have different word cues. And they've taught Billy how to communicate with them. And one of my personal catchphrases for the past few weeks has been Billy mad. Billy mad. And I find it really charming, but also amazing. The first few times I saw this technique and saw how useful it's been to create this bridge between human beings and their house pets, I think it's monumental. I think it's amazing. I think it's on the level of Coco the gorilla and sign language, because these animals are not only using words in a way that you can tell that they're having genuine associations and it's not just simple training, but you can tell that in different circumstances the animals are brainstorming to themselves which words are going to be best used to adapt to the new concepts and things that they're trying to map out with their owners based on their experiences together. Amazing stuff. BilliSpeaks is very cute. I think in a way it's almost like the beginning of genuine multi-species communication, but also it's kind of like Billy has this cybernetic voice box that she can hit all these different points on. So that's really interesting. And it kind of dovetails, like I said, into We 3. So check out We 3. It's really awesome. And now we get into the spooky stuff. So one of the pieces of research that I checked out in the past few weeks is a lecture called Brain Science from Bench to Battlefield by Dr. James Giordano. And it is sponsored by the Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory Center for Global Security Research, and it was recorded, it seems, in June of 2017. And he's breaking down various aspects of neuroscience and how it's applied in both interfacing, but as well as weapons potentials. And he's using a lot of really detailed industry jargon. So if you're someone who's not particularly familiar with certain kinds of language, I would digest it in chunks. It's a little over an hour long. It's very thorough, really good stuff. Good in the sense that it's informative, but it's terrifying. I'm not going to lie, it's absolutely terrifying. He's talking about nanoparticles that are able to transfer drugs across the blood-brain barrier. He's talking about transcranial brain stimulation technologies. He's talking about things similar to what we saw. A group of American diplomats over the past year who had been doing official business at an embassy, and they all got microwaved, and they were having really mysterious illnesses that started cropping up shortly after. And when they looked at the overlapping symptom sets, they realized that these people had been microwave weaponry. So this is an example of how frequency technology has come into the battlefield, has come into play with international conflicts and relations, unfortunately. And it's real. So, the kinds of concepts that used to be tinfoil hat territory where, the lady who's paranoid about the shiny fly on her wall. Well, guess what, folks? There's real DARPA Biorg flies and beetles and dragonflies now. And this guy goes over it in his talk, Dr. James Giordano. He straight up talks about DARPA projects that include the DARPA beetle as well as the DARPA fly. And he talks about how more recent iterations have been becoming more streamlined. The DARPA dragonfly, it seems, is able to have a much smaller solar unit battery pack as opposed to the beetle, which needed a rechargeable battery pack. I feel ridiculous talking about these things like this, so forgive me. And for context, it's important to understand that certain fields of brain science are really only about 40 or 50 years old at the max. So he's seen the trajectory of it evolve over those decades, and he really knows what he's talking about, and I highly recommend checking out the talk. Going back to the human use of animals in military context, I mean, we're not talking about ancient war elephants, we're not talking about the cavalry, but for many decades, human beings have been aspiring to use animals in a more sophisticated way when it comes to enacting warfare. Even in Vietnam, the U.S. Navy used dolphins as well as sea lions. They even had a program that was based in San Diego, California, where the animals were housed and trained on an ongoing basis. And the animal teams have been deployed for use in combat zones, such as during the Vietnam War and the Iraq War, for example. Crazy, huh? It kind of reminds you of John Lilly's work and going back to those cool cybernetic dolphins and Johnny Mnemonic. It's very surreal. So some of these interfaces are not limited to just microphones and surveilling devices. Some of these interfaces also have been exploring the possibility of controlling the animals so they can sort of dictate where they go and piloting them, basically using them as an external biological drone. They've been doing stuff with bugs where they try to control the path of the insect. And some of this also goes back to when they initially tried to put a microphone inside a cat's ear and little, just radio sensor antenna coming out the base of her skull. We know that cats are not very trainable, and unfortunately, when they were testing this and they sent the cat out into a park to do initial trials, the cat turned around and ran out into the street and was run over by a taxi. So, sad story, yes, but it just shows that those are the underlying reasons why they are doing more research on the brain-computer interfaces. And even though initially they're doing their testing on animals and creating bioorgs, ultimately what it comes down to is they want to be able to have computer-brain interfaces for their, how do you say, soldiers? Yeah, they want universal soldiers. They want cybernetic soldier guys. I'm going to go ahead and include some very surreal suggestions regarding this. There's a book called Oracle of the Illuminati by William Henry, and there's a book called Cloak of the Illuminati by William Henry. Now, on the surface, this looks like a very occult or mystical kind of book suggestion, but there are definitely lots of passages in there where, very ahead of his time, I must say, he's making reference to some of the research that MIT has been making in hopes of achieving a nanotechnological suit, sort of like an exoskeleton, an exoskin made of nanoparticles that would adapt to not only the environment but the commands of the wearer, potentially through a brain interface at will. Now, when you listen to the stuff that James Giordano is talking about in his lecture, he's talking about drug delivery systems, he's talking about nanoparticles in aerosols, and how that's not only a weaponized thing, but it could also be, a medical delivery for drugs, for gene therapy, for potentially for like wound aids in the field. Like, say you get cut and maybe there's like, some kind of nanosalve. So various militaries around the world have been using this new class of weapon, and this can be used in a couple different ways. Basically, what's being said here is that you can use chemical agents, you can use electrochemical agents, or you can use just straight up frequency weapons. You can use microwave, you can use transcranial brain stimulation, and you can disrupt somebody's neural network, and you can do it in targeted ways that affect their perception. You can sort of like bend their perception of space-time. You can disorient their senses. You can give them false perceptual input. And what they call that is altered reality tactics. Because we are electrochemical beings, it's possible to understand the way our native biological systems work and then artificially disrupt those systems. One of the things he talks about in his lecture is how if you're able to map out the neural connectivity of your enemy or several of your enemy, once you have a sort of like aggregate for the way that their brains are operating in real time, you can custom tailor ways to disrupt that. I'm going to talk a little bit about the DARPA office. So, DARPA feels that biology takes its rightful place among the core sciences that represent the future of defense technology. Officially known as the Biological Technologies Office, the BTO, its goals are to harness the power of biological systems by applying the rigorous tools of engineering and related disciplines, and to design the next generation of technologies that are inspired by insights gained from the life sciences. So this is basically biomimicry on steroids. They want to go ahead and utilize the fact that fish swim, birds fly, all these creatures in the ecosystem have highly specialized ways of moving through matter, space, and time, but also are more easily manipulated with these new brain-computer interface technologies than it would necessarily be to design drones that are that specialized to go into different environments. I don't want you to become the schizoid who thinks that black helicopters are coming for them, or that the fly that has a naturally occurring iridescent sheen on its back, which is true, those are not little blinking lights, okay? Like, I don't think that any average everyday individual is going to be like one of them targeted individuals. But it is important to understand the nature of technology, where it's at when it comes to warfare and development, because that is, in my personal opinion, what allows a society to have more of a realistic political understanding of what's going on with international relations and geopolitics and all kinds of other stuff. Before we go, I want to familiarize you with a little bit of background stuff regarding the anatomy of neurons. So in this video, here we go, let's include this awesome little diagram of a neuron. And it's labeled for you as well, so you can sort of see the different aspects that make up a singular neural cell. And these are the fundamental unit that construct neural networks in your brain. And in the human brain, there's 86 billion of them. Thanks so much for watching. You can support me on patreon.com/Seraphin, and you can check out our mother website, dreamseedvr.com. And stay tuned for some additional interviews that are coming up in the next few weeks. And as always, dream deep, have a beautiful day tomorrow, and I will catch you again next time.